All right, good morning. Welcome, everybody. Glad everybody's here. So we are going to continue our wonderful look into Genesis and go start into Exodus today. So let's go ahead and pray. Father, thank you for this, what you're giving us. Help us to understand you better, because that's really the whole goal of all this, is to understand you. Understand who you are, what you do, how you work in people's lives. Father, we just commit this to you in Jesus' name. So the thing is, today we're going to be, your paper for today, and it's actually, there's some back on that, there's some on the back seat right there, is from Aristides the philosopher. Now, unfortunately, she didn't get me the whole thing. This actually is about total of 6 pages, I think, 7 pages. But that's okay, because the most important part of it is here anyway. Now, what's interesting is that for in him, in God, in Christ, all things were created. Things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers, rulers or authorities. Meaning that God puts all things into place. Everything is done because of God. In the end, he's in charge of everything. We're going to find over the next few weeks that God is going to do what he wants to do. And it doesn't matter how powerful you are, how wonderful you are, who you think you are, you're not going to change it. And that's a good thing, because that's the same God that's in our lives. Remember, the Old Testament is history. If you want to see what God does in people's lives, you read the Old Testament. Because we see how God interacts with people and how he takes people through things. And that's really what we've been doing since the beginning, is going through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Now we're going to Joseph today and go do a little bit with Moses. God has a great plan, but it's not going to be easy. The hardest thing we need to read, one of the things that I guess it was hardest for me in my Christian walk, was to realize that Christianity is not this great, wonderful, all wonderful, and everything is just heaven and angels singing with little guitars and woo-hoo-hoo. You know, it's sometimes very difficult. But in the end, this is what's going to happen, it says in Psalm 65. Now, Psalm 65 is basically contrasting those who walk with God and those who don't. We're not talking unbelievers. I'm talking Christians. Because this was specifically written to Israel, who knew God. And this is what he said. Those who walk with him, that's what he says. My servants will eat, but you will go hungry. My servants will drink, but you will go thirsty. My servants will rejoice, but you will be put to shame. What that's really talking about is that when we do it God's way, when we allow him to take us, it doesn't matter what it is. Because I'm going to tell you something. The people we study, they didn't like a lot of stuff that happened to them. We're going to find that out today, how that Joseph, that wasn't very fun. But the key is, in the end, he said, yes, Lord, I'm going to do it your way. And all three, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, did the exact same thing. But you got to remember, God reached out to them first. God looked to them first. God grabbed them first. God had a plan for them first. And in the end, his will was done. Because Jesus says it all. When he says, Lord, if it's your will, take this cup from me. You think he wanted to do that? I don't blame him. But in the end, he said, but not my will, but what? Your will be done. That's the goal. If we learn nothing else about today, learn that no matter what circumstance God brings us through, we need to say, your will be done. Because his servants will eat. But if you're not doing his will, you're going to go thirsty. His servants will drink. But if you're not doing his will, he's going to go hungry. And the good news is we see through these guys that they all did God's will. And God had a plan. It wasn't always easy. But in the end, it worked out for the good. All right, and that's kind of what I did with this. This is the very first, I've given this together, and I've given this in a few other classes, but the key is with this is the first of Christian apology, written in about 140 AD. And what this is basically saying this is who God is. And this guy is describing to one of the emperors of Rome who God is. And it's an amazing way. I've never read anything this good. I read this all the time because it tells exactly who God is and how powerful God is and what God does. And that really goes into what we're going to see today. So, dun, 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 dun. It's not going forward. Uh-oh. We now have no battery. We have no battery. It has no battery. Oh. Would you do me a favor? Would you go get Robbie and see he needs a new battery? Because this thing is, please. I just need a new battery. You want to grab one? Yeah, that'd be great. It's a 2 AAAs. AAAs. So, I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. I have no control over that. I'm sorry. I know. I'm sorry. I know it's very distracting. Yeah. Well, I'll tell Robbie about that. Maybe he can stop that for next time. So, how many are in here? 2. See if this is going to work. Let's see. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Oh, here's the old ones. Thank you so much. Well, like we used to say in the Navy, if you can't fix it, use duct tape and baling wire. Guaranteed to fix everything. Oh, no, that's not doing it either. No. No. Anyway, well, let me just go through this is the reason why I always bring my iPad, because I have it all on here too. This is the exact reason why I do this. All right, so the hatred of Joseph. Oh, hey, sir, this is not working. There, now it's working. Oh my gosh, it wasn't working before. Yeah, seriously, because we just changed the batteries. We tried everything. All right. The hatred of Joseph begins. Now, let me tell you something. Joseph kind of deserves this. Not really. He doesn't deserve being thrown in a pit and sold to Midianites. But the key is he kind of deserved this. And let's kind of see what he did. Now, we've got to remember, in the end, God has huge plans for him. But the problem is Joseph was, in the very beginning, not very, let's just say he was a little prideful, had some issues. But God worked those things out. In Genesis 37:2, Joseph, a young man, was tending his flocks, his brothers. He brought their father a bad report about his brothers. Basically, he told on his brothers. That would make them mad, right? It didn't make you mad. He told on you. That was the first thing Joseph did. Second thing, Israel loved Joseph more than any other sons because he's been born to his old age and made an ornate robe for him. He's daddy's boy. Brothers didn't like that too much. Oh, you're the favored one. Number 3, Joseph had a dream and told it to his brothers. Let's see what the dream actually said. Listen to the dream. We were binding sheaves of grain in the field when suddenly my sheaf stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. Ouch. Now, we got to remember, God gave him these dreams. The problem was, he probably could have used a little more wisdom of how to present them. And his brother said, do you intend to reign over us? Well, in a sense, yeah, it's going to happen that way. But at this time, I would have been mad too. Will you actually rule over us? Oops. And Joseph had another dream. Uh-oh. He said, I had another dream. At this time, the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down before me. Now, wait a minute. Sun, if we have to understand polytheism, in the end, sun was always the main god. The main dude is the sun. Big guy. So who do you think he was talking about? His dad, Jacob, Israel, is going to have to bow down before him too. The sun. The moon is the consort, always. Mom. So whenever you look at sun, moon, that's going to be the same polytheism. Baal and Ashtoreth. Those two are always found together because one's the husband, one's the wife. Polytheism is always, they're always married. So, dad and mom will bow down for me. And the 11 stars, all my brothers will. Father rebuked and said, what is this dream you had? Your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you. Ruh-roh, Rorge. His brothers were jealous of him. I'd be a little angry too. So to set the stage, he didn't deserve what happened to him, but the problem was he probably could have did this a little bit better. They didn't like him. I'm sorry? He was being truthful, but if you were the youngest son and say, hey guys, you're going to bow down to me, you think they would be... They're going to be a little mad. They're going to say, first he gave a bad report about him. Said, oh, Dad, you know what they did? Then he was the favorite son. Then he had dreams that not only his brother's going to bow down, but mom and dad is also going to bow down. I think I'd be a little upset too. But the key is God did put these here, so it will end up this way. We got to get there. So what happened was they took Joseph out, and they were going to kill him. And Reuben actually says, no, don't kill him. That's not good. We got blood on our hands. We're not going to do that. So let's just go. And they threw him in a pit, in a cistern, basically where water gets a vat of water. And so they threw him in there, and they're like, now what are we going to do with him? So if nothing else, sell him into slavery. Yeah, that's the right way to do it. Yeah. So what happened was this. So Judas said to his brother, what will we gain if we kill our brother? Let's cover up his blood. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay hands on him. Now, we're going to find out in the Bible that, remember, who were the Ishmaelites? We just learned this. Who were they? I'm sorry? The Arabs, right. And who was Ishmael? Son of Abraham. Right, the Arabs, so Saudi Arabia, that's where Ishmaelites. Think about where Islam comes from. Whenever you see Ishmaelites, you always think Islam, because Islam grabbed a hold of Ishmael and said Ishmael is the rightful son and not Isaac. Anyway, so then Ishmaelites spoke. Then it also said the Midianites. So most likely what most people think is that what happened was they sold them to the Ishmaelites. Then the Ishmaelites sold him to the Midianites. Who is Midian? Got to remember this one because we're going to learn more about him today. Midian came from whom? Yes. No, not Moses. No, he goes to Midian. Close. He goes to Midian. But remember we learned about this a couple weeks ago? Midian was a son of Abraham. Remember, they had the other sons. You hear very little, but I made a big point to show you guys that that's important to remember. Which is why it's kind of good to learn some of those genealogy things, because Midian was a son of Abraham, and he becomes famous because you're right, Moses goes there. So the Midianites, they're the ones they actually believe sold them. So who do we sell them to? Some dude named Potiphar. Hey, we got to go back down to Egypt again. Why not? Everybody go to Egypt, right? Best thing to do, go to Egypt. So he sold him to Potiphar, who was the captain of the guard. He was a big dude. It's kind of like a general. He's a big guy. He was powerful. So he bought Joseph. Now what's interesting about all this is God is starting to institute a plan to prepare Joseph to do something. This is all in a plan. It stinks. It is yucky. This is not fun. But in the end, God worked it out for the good. Let's take a look at that. So what happened is Joseph then goes, and Joseph is and God blesses him, and Joseph goes and takes over all of Potiphar's house and says, hey, I'm the big guy. He was the big guy. And he was very humble about it. So God elevated Joseph to the top. So Joseph ran his whole house. Now you got to remember, with this guy, Potiphar, he was a very, very important guy. So he had a ton of people in his household, different servants and everything else. Joseph was the top guy. So Joseph was also, I guess, pretty hot. And the women really liked Joseph. Well, Potiphar's wife's like, whoo, man, this young guy, looking good. You know, and she goes to Joseph, she goes, come on, let's go have sex. And Joseph like, no, I don't think so. See, this is smart man. Because when we find out in the Bible, we often find out whenever guys decide to go the opposite direction, it doesn't ever end up well for them like David. Solomon didn't end up well for him. Going into sexual sin is not the best way to go. So Joseph was smart. So he kept going, nope, fleeing, and said, no, I'm not going to do this. He said, because he goes, everything is under my control. And you are part of the house that I'm in control. So I'm not going to sin against my master by doing this with you, because you belong to him. He was a smart guy. But the wife said, no, I really want you, dude. I don't know what her problem was. She was watching too many soap operas, I guess. So the thing is, she wanted to come to bed with me, but he refused. So what finally happened is she got angry that he wouldn't take her advances. And he ran away one time because she grabbed a hold of him and said, come on, let's go to bed. And he said, no. And so his robe went, and as we know, the robe that Dad gave him was pretty good looking. It was a nice looking robe. He probably had the same thing. And so she had that robe. And then, so what does she do? Rape, rape, rape. She told him he raped him. Now, I mean, Joseph's life at this point is not very fun. He was sold into slavery. He was beaten by his brother, thrown in a pit, sold into slavery. Now this lady is saying this. He did none of it. But what happened is that Potiphar liked Joseph and sent him to the good jail. Okay? He didn't go to Guantanamo. He went to the good jail. Okay, we'd call that the minimum security jail. Basically, this jail was not this bad, but it wasn't as bad, because so what happened is all of the king's people the king was mad at goes to that jail. So it was a little more high-class jail than the other ones. It was still jail. And so what happened, Joseph got thrown in there. He could have been killed for that. Notice that Potiphar didn't kill him. He could have. I have a feeling Potiphar knew what was going on. But he didn't. He sent him to the not-so-bad jail, which is a good thing, but it's not, you're still jail. So what happened is that Joseph rose in the ranks, just like he did. Now, are we getting a picture here? The picture here is God has got a plan with Joseph. God is preparing Joseph. See, the key is when we understand that when things go bad in our lives and hard in our lives, what God is actually doing is doing something very specific for us. God has got a plan. It may stink for Joseph, but you know what? In the end, God saw him through. And God taught him, just like with Paul. When did Paul write the most important books of the Bible? Yes, when he was in prison. Now, what can we learn from this? God, no matter what God does in your life, no matter what God takes you through, in the end, He will provide for you. And he's got a plan because he's got to train this guy in a specific way, which we'll see in a little bit. So the baker and the cupbearer both come to him and says, hey, man, we had these dreams. And Joseph's like, we got it. I got it. We got the dreams going for you. Let me tell you what they mean. So Joseph interpreted the dreams. And the cupbearer, what's going to happen is, you can read, we're not going to go into the detail of that, but basically the cupbearer and the baker, they got sent back, and Joseph said, you're going to be released, and you're going to have to go back before Pharaoh. One of you is going to die in 3 days. The other in 3 days is going to be put back into his regular position again. Does anybody know what Joseph asked them to do for him? Remember him, yes. So basically he said, hey, when you get back to the big guy, Pharaoh, king, don't forget me. And what happened was, exactly what Joseph told him happened, really did happen to him. The baker was killed 3 days later, and the cupbearer was restored to his normal place. The cupbearer was one of the most important people of the house. By the way, does anybody know who the most famous cupbearer in the Bible is? Nehemiah! Yes, good job. Nehemiah. Yes, I believe he was Artaxerxes' cupbearer. I think it was Xerxes, not Artaxerxes. So Xerxes' cupbearer. Basically, there's the guys that have the most prominent position. They're going to drink the wine first, so that when that wine kills them, the king would say, oh, bummer, dude, you just died, but hey, at least I didn't. The cupbearer is an important part. So the cupbearer was always in his presence. He asked them to do this, but unfortunately, they forgot about him. Or he should say he did, because the other guy died. 2 years. He stayed in prison 2 more years. But what happened was, God elevated his position again. He was in charge of everything again. That happened. This is the second time that he was in charge of everything under a specific leader. He was second in command twice already. That becomes important, because we got to remember, again, God prepares us for what he wants us to do. God did the same with David. Do you know how long it was that David knew he was supposed to be king, right? How long from the time God took him in with Saul till the time he became king? Anybody know how long it was? $10 years. Okay? Now, for David, that was 10 years only to become king of Judah only. It was, I think, another 9 years became king of all of Israel. So the key is, we need to understand, no matter what we go through in our lives, God has a plan, and God does it. It may not always be fun, but in the end, it's going to work out for the best, good, the greatest. So, and that's what happened with him. Pharaoh then had dreams 2 years later. Pharaoh didn't know. We're going to talk next week about his diviners and everything else. We're going to talk about that next week, polytheism stuff, but we're not going to do it this time, because his guys came to him and couldn't interpret it. But the cupbearer finally remembers Joseph and said, oops, I made a mistake. I know this dude that can do this for you. And his name is Joseph. What ended up happening is that Joseph said, hey, the Pharaoh said, look, I had a dream that I had all these cows come in, and then for 7 years, there's 7 cows. Then I had a dream that there was 7. Then what happened is the 7 cows turned to 7 skinny cows. Fat cows, skinny cows. Then he had a dream a second night that all this wheat came in, and they were wonderful, wonderful, nice wheat. 7 grains of that, and then 7 grains of yucky-looking wheat. So Joseph told him, 7 years, you're going to have 7 years of harvest, 7 years of famine. And so what happened was, now it's interesting, Because if you're, now, let's just say you go to the president and say, hey, I got this thing and let me tell you what's going on. Do you think the president would even listen to you? What's interesting about this whole thing is he did listen to Joseph. He did listen to Joseph. What ended up happening to Joseph after this? He became what? I'm sorry? Second in command. Well, wait a minute. Wasn't he already second in command 2 different times? Do you think that God is doing something here? God is preparing him for second in command. And that's what happens. He became second in command. He literally became second. He became the vice president, the big guy over everything. And literally, the only person that was over him was Pharaoh. So what ended up happening, exactly what Joseph said was going to happen, happened. And so 7 years, they stored up all this grain. Joseph went out to get all this stuff taken care of. And then the 7 years of famine hit. Remember we talked about Egypt. This is important. In Egypt, most people go where when famines hit? What country do they go to back in the day when famines hit? Egypt. Yeah, because Egypt always has the best, but even Egypt was going to a famine. But the key was they stored so much to begin with. God brought them in. And so guess who drew them? Guess who came to Egypt now? So who came to Egypt after Joseph? His family. Yeah, Jacob. You're right. Now, wait a minute. Doesn't this sound familiar when we talked about Abraham? Abraham said that your people are going to go where for 430 years? Egypt. Remember? God said, one of the first things that he said to Abraham, your family's going to go somewhere for 430 years. You think God has a plan going on here? All of a sudden, the whole troop comes down there. Now they're all in Egypt. And that's where they're going to stay. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? I was thinking about Pinky in the Brain. Oh, Pinky, do you know what I'm thinking? Oh, Brian, I'm not sure. But the thing is, God has a plan. God is doing his plan. Now, God said to Abraham 300 years before, 200 years before, this is what's going to happen. And guess what? It happened. Exactly the way he said. Do you think you can trust him for that? You think you can trust him in your life because of this? What God says, he does. I guarantee. I am a good example of it. Everything that God, the more you allow God to do in your life, the more you allow God to do things in your life, he will bring you through till the end. Remember, my people will have drink, but you'll go thirsty. So, God will do this, and God is doing this. So he brought Joseph's family down, but Joseph wanted to play a trick on him. I don't think he was being mean, but the reality was he's still probably a little bitter. I don't blame him. You got sold into slavery. You went to jail. You got all this stuff happen. So the family came down, and I'm not going to go through all the different stuff because we have some other things. But the key is that the family came down. Joseph says, "It's me." Not at first. Now, he lied at first. Now, at first he didn't lie, but he basically kind of did some deceptions. He wanted to see what's going on. Again, I really recommend you guys reading Genesis chapter 40 through 50 to get all this stuff because we don't have much time to do that. But the key is, in the beginning, he said, he didn't tell them. But, in the end, he told them. And now, what did Pharaoh do for Joseph's family? He gave them fertile land. He gave them fertile land. The land of Goshen. So not only was Joseph blessed, but his family was blessed because of Joseph. All the junk that Joseph went through, in the end, God worked it out for the good and brought his family and took care of his family, and they got to the land of Goshen, which is really, really good land. That's what Goshen looks. Actually, that's Bar. So this is what Goshen looks like. It's not ugly like most of Egypt. Most of Egypt, very ugly, not good stuff. But by the way, do you know that even today, Egypt named something after Joseph? That's called Joseph's Waterway. He really did exist, guys. Why would a Muslim country keep that? Because he really did exist. They have a waterway named after him, Bar Yusuf. Basically, that's Arabic for, the river of Joseph. That's named after Joseph. This really happened. He has a water named after him from the last 4,000 years. 4,000 years has been named that. So they went to Goshen, and they basically went over there, and they were down in Lower Egypt. Now, by the way, if you ever see Lower and Upper Egypt, the name is kind of this weird, because Lower we think's below, but when it came to Africa, Lower is actually the top part of Egypt, and Upper is the bottom part of Egypt. Only because it kind of goes on as downward things. So just so you know, Lower and Upper. All right. So, but what happened in the end, was, over time, Joseph's family got in there, but over time, they ended up, some new rulers came in called the Hyksos. Now, these guys are interesting because they actually were people from Canaan, the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They're from the land. So these Hyksos, what they did is they came in, and they were in for about 1638 to 1530 BC. They came in and took everything over. Now, we don't know if it was the Hyksos who did it, but somebody ended up taking all the Israelites and putting them into slavery. So one of these guys ended up saying, because the Bible says, well, there was a Pharaoh that did not know Joseph, Jacob, and those guys, and they went into slavery. Let me tell you something. This may seem like, oh my gosh, why would God do that to them? Let me tell you guys, we're setting the stage, God is setting the stage right now for the most phenomenal thing to ever happen, the most phenomenal thing other than Jesus in the whole Bible. Okay? To the Jews, this is the most important thing that God is about to do. More important than anything else other than Jesus. So they had to go to slavery because they had to be rescued by God. And we're going to see next week what God did to prove himself to them. Because if they didn't go into slavery and God said, hey, I want you to move from this nice, beautiful land of Goshen up to Canaan, who's not as nice and beautiful, do you think Israel would have went if they just lived on their own, had their own great things? They were, No. They had to go to here. So this is going to set up, all this story is going to set up what we're going to call the law. The paper I gave you guys on the law is going to set this up. Now, I recommend you reading that paper again to help you to understand what is about to happen. This had to happen. He had to get them in a place that they were in need so he could save them. Because if you don't need to be saved, why do you need him? A lot of times in my life, I've realized that I went through some really tough times only to come find out that, you know what? It made me need God. It made me need God. They're going to need God because of this, because they're going to slavery. 430 years of it. These are some of the, by the way, I just throw this in here. These are some of the pharaohs that actually were over them, that during the time of Israel was in slavery, these guys are there. So we're setting the stage for this humongous thing to begin to happen in Israel. that God is going to come in and he is going to, as the Bible says, save them with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Now, if you want to know what that means, you are falling off a building and you have like this and you're hanging on, you're about ready to fall, but this guy with this super duper mighty hand, outstretched arm, grabs you and saves you. That's what that means in the Bible. You're dying, you're about ready to go, you're about ready to go into the drink or whatever you're going to go to. The mighty hand, his outstretched arm, is going to grab you and save you. That's what God is about to do. And I really want to stress this over the next few weeks, that when we get into this, you're going to see that God is going to do everything he says in here that I gave you guys, your paper this week. That he is, and there's extra papers in the chair there. When we're finished, you guys can have some. But the key is, God is going to set the stage. Just like with Joseph. Joseph went through some really, really terrible times. But in the end, did God do what he said in his word, that he worked everything out in the end? Did God work everything out in the end for Joseph? Yeah, Joseph had quite the good life after that. Not to say it was that great, but I mean, seriously, because he still had difficult things. But the key is, God is going to do this. So let's talk about Moses then. So we know God is going to come in and do this. So we're going to go into the next guy who went through some really, really hard times before. And God trained Moses and did the same thing for Moses. Do you know how long Moses was in exile for? Anybody? 40 years. For Moses, everything's 40 years. Now, by the way, we don't know if it was 38 or 39 or 41. But again, it's all 40. So Moses was 40, and then he went to exile for 40 years. So what happened was, these guys, Israel was in bondage. They were in slavery, and they were the guys. Now, they're the ones who helped make the pyramids. They will help make the pyramids. And let me tell you, if you see how big those bad boys are, and you see how ugly it is and how dry it is, they had to actually make the bricks for the pyramids. Not a fun thing. So what happened was that Moses, the leaders of Egypt, what they did was they were getting scared because the Israelites were growing and growing and growing in number. We find this in Exodus, beginning of Exodus. They're growing in number. So what did the pharaohs do because of that? What did the pharaohs do for that reason? They were growing in number. They wanted to stop them growing in number. What did they do? Exactly. Kill the sons. Kill the sons. Anybody know another part of the Bible that the same thing happened? Jesus, right. Who was the one who did that? Anybody remember? Herod, yeah, about 4 BC. That's one of the reasons why we know Jesus was born around 4 BC and not 0 AD. Because of the whole thing, we know that happened. So, what happened was the Egyptians were saying, we don't like these guys. We're going to have them thrown into the Nile. And so, but the Israelite midwives, what did they do? Anybody remember?
They said that the Hebrew women gave birth before they got there.
That's right. Oh, they're good. They pop this stuff out. They're good. They got the baby going flying. They got the catch. They didn't have to have the catcher's mitt. So, here's the babies. And so, they said, okay, so from then they said, then they started making it worse, and that's where we see Moses coming into the play. Because what happened was Moses' mom delivered Moses and said, we can't take care of him because they'll find out. So she put them in a basket of reeds and floated him down the Nile. Who picked him up? Pharaoh's daughter. Now again, guys, here is another important thing to remember what God's doing. What was Moses raised as? Egyptian. Yes. Egyptian. Yeah, he was raised as an Egyptian. So he knew the customs. He knew how to get to Pharaoh. He knew who to go to for different things. That's going to become important here in just a little bit, and starting next week, that when he has to go back to them. We got to remember, God trained him as an Egyptian. He knows how to do this. So when God sends Moses to Pharaoh, he already knew what's going on. Are you getting what God's doing here? Is it me, or is this God is just amazing in the little details of things? Because the greatest thing God could have done with Moses, if Moses was just a Bedouin farmer, he wouldn't have known how to go and even deal with things before Pharaoh. So when God sends him back 40 years later, he already knew. It's just amazing what God did. So Moses was raised an Egyptian. Then what happened? They were beating the Egyptians, the Israelites up. Moses killed one of the Egyptians to save the Israelites. And then Pharaoh found out about it. Moses fled. Okay? Moses fled. He moves to Midian. Remember that? Midian comes back again. This is why it's important, very, very important in the Old Testament to remember some of these guys, because they keep popping up. Midian will come up a lot in the Pentateuch. So he moved over there, went past the Sinai Peninsula, moved to Midian, and Jethro, which was his father-in-law, became a sheep herder over there, and then we go. So.
I am here.
No, we have no sound.
Put off thy shoes from off thy feet.
Oh well. So
for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground.
So if we saw the Ten Commandments, we know Charlton has been here. This is where God meets Moses.
I am the God of thy father.
Remember,
the God of Abraham,
in the Bible, remember this.
The God of Isaac,
they did not find God. You didn't just, I found Christ.
Lord,
you didn't find him. He wasn't lost.
Lord, why do you not hear the cries of their children in the bondage of Egypt?
Looking for God?
I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt.
God,
and I have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters. For I know their sorrows.
God came in a burning bush.
Therefore I will send thee, Moses,
God said,
unto Pharaoh.
This was the theophany.
That thou mayest bring my people out of Egypt.
But God was there. Take off your shoes.
Who am I, Lord,
that Moses had to kneel down.
That you should send me?
So Moses basically said, God said
how
to
can
Moses,
I lead this people out of bondage?
To go back. And Moses said,
what
hey,
words
God,
can I speak
these
that
people
they
are having
will
a hard
heed?
time over there.
I will teach thee what thou wilt say.
And Moses ended up, and God ended up sending Moses back 40 years later. Moses was 80 when he left. He was 80. We're almost done. So the key is Moses is about to go back, and that's what we're really going to get next week, is that Moses is going to do this, and we're going to see God deal with people. Because the key is with all of this, there's a theme here, that we are God's workmanship. God does great things. We are created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared in advance for us to do. God comes to us. God does the work. God brings us to where we need to go. God tells us where to go. God leads us and guides us. The most important thing as a Christian you can do, is obey Him. If God's leading you somewhere, just do it, whether it looks good or not. Because that's what God did with Abraham. He did it with Isaac. He did it with Jacob. He did it with Joseph. He did it with Moses. He did it with David. He did it with everybody. Okay? So I'm hoping this will encourage you guys today to really look to Him and allow God to do what He needs to do in your life. Next week, we're going to start going through the plagues, and we're going to go through the Exodus. So make sure you guys grab your papers, and we are done.